I'm going to be talking about the role of the performer in music and kind of what this phrase that is being knocked around about means, because letting the music speak for itself can completely change meaning in a different context. So, for example, take modern vocal music. It's usually just about letting the tune shine through and not overcomplicating things. But if you take it back further to the kind of music that I like to perform, so we'll take it to the Romantic era, there's actually quite a big debate going on about how much power the performer should actually have when it comes to interpreting a piece of music that they didn't write themselves. So the way I like to think of music production, pretty simply, is essentially as a chain. So what begins as just an original idea in a composer's head eventually has to make its way to an audience, and there are going to be necessary steps in between. And the complication with this is that a lot of that original idea can get lost in translation. So, I mean, first off, you've got your first problem, which is that the music has to be written down. And as time goes on and on, you get composers being a lot more specific about what they want in a piece of music, and they will write more detailed description to try and give insight to a performer, but there's still some parts of music that you just can't communicate through writing. But then when it comes to the more controversial topic, I guess, is with the performer, because there's this question about whether they should just reproduce what is in front of them and let the audience hear it, form their own opinions, or whether this performer should actually take the power from the composer and be able to put their personal spin on it, add maybe a more authentic meaning for themselves. So this first opinion, I guess it's more like saying let the composer speak for themselves than actually to let the music speak for itself. So you take the performer as kind of a useful tool to get the music across, who's necessary, but kind of not really wanted, just a middleman. So they should just take all the conditions they can find on the paper, show it to the audience. That's where their role ends. They've got no further part in it. And this is kind of the idea of you need to keep that original music authentic. You need to get it as close to what the composer intended as possible. But past that, there's nothing. It could be seen as paying some sort of disrespect to the composer if you change it in any way. And there was actually one famous composer in the Romantic period, Brahms, who definitely had this side of the opinion, because there's a story that he refused to go to the opera once because he said that if he sat at home and just read the music off the score in his living chair, then he'd get a better performance of it and he'd know what the music sounded like. But then we've got the complete opposite side of the spectrum, which is with a composer called Debussy, who was around at about the same time. And so he actually went to a lot of performances of his own pieces in concert. And there's one in particular that stands out because it was from a performer called Copland. And he went up to him backstage after the concert and he asked him why he changed one of the songs a little bit. Because he changed the beginning, I think he'd slowed it down, something like that. And he asked him why he'd done it. And Copland said something pretty vague and just generic, something along the lines of, I just played it how I felt it. But Debussy, he took it on board and he told him to carry on playing it like that, even though it was his own piece of music and it wasn't how he personally would have performed it. And Debussy was a performer as well. He played the piece himself. But this kind of shows that he saw his performance and his interpretation of the piece not as on a pedestal above other people, but he was just one voice amongst many and he respected other people performers. So suddenly this performer has gone from a middleman to an artist in their own right who can take a piece and mold it to their personal opinion of it, create their own version, and they should be encouraged to do this. So personally, I would definitely lean towards this side of the argument. I think you can take any professional musician out there and they are going to be perfectly capable of playing every single note right, and they will play at the right volume in the right place, and they can use the speed that's written down on the music, and that's fine. But there's got to be a reason why some performers are more successful than others, for example, or why some versions of exactly the same piece can move audiences when others just can't. And I think this really is to do with putting your own spin on things and making it your own and creating a kind of personal authenticity that wasn't there before. So, right, I'm going to play a piece now. It's called... No? Okay. It's called La Puerta del Vino. It's by Debussy, and it was based around this picture here. Now, what I think about the whole interpretation side of things is that you should still keep in mind some basic details about the piece when you're playing it. So I still think respecting the composer's intention is important. For example, it's so useful to just know who they were, or who they are, if they're still alive, and why they were driven to write the piece. Romanticism is it's all about everything that's irrational, emotional, and creative. So sometimes it's even possible to get inside the mind of the composer, see what kind of emotions were running through their head when they wrote the piece. Debussy, he was a great lover of nature. He often talks about how it influenced a lot of his most famous pieces. But this one is about this wine gate in Alhambra, and apparently he saw it on the back of a postcard, and he was suddenly inspired to write this piece about it. And because of this, when you hear it, you should be able to hear some kind of authentic Spanish style in there, some elements of Spanish music, and also some non-traditional, kind of quite colorful harmony that he was really well known for. So I'm going to try and depict this image as well as I can through the music, through Debussy's music. But I don't think to do this, you can just let the music speak for itself. So I think you should always add your own voice as well. I hope you enjoy.